Hello, and welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we'll look back on the movies, TV, games, people, and phenomena that we still love talking about all these years later, and ask ourselves why these bits of pop culture still enchant us today. This week, we'll be revisiting...
Does it give you pleasure to make other people laugh?
Yeah, I guess it does. Let me think about that. Yeah, I guess the answer would be yes, it does. Hell, I'm a cartoonist.
But you're not
what
sure.
would be the answer? Well, I don't... I think I sit down... I think the first thing I want to do is satisfy myself and do something that would make me laugh. I mean, my world is a lot smaller where I work.
In the 1980s and early 90s, I can remember spending almost every morning with a newspaper open, reading the comic strips. And today we're talking about one of my favorites. This loomed large for me because it was weird and so was I. And so today we are talking about The Far Side, probably one of the most widely read and loved comic strips of its day and really still into the future. So I'm really excited to talk about this. We have a returning guest with us. This was his idea, and I think it's a fantastic one. He is a stand-up comedian. He is a writer on Netflix's Spirit Rangers, and he is the creator of the Comedy Central digital series Gone Native and a member of the Cowlitz tribe himself. Please welcome back to the podcast, Joey Clift.
Hey everybody. Yeah, thanks so much for having me back, Doug. I'm you emailed me and the opportunity to talk about, The Far Side is always something I'm going to jump on. So yeah, thanks for having me back.
Sure. Now this was your pick, and I'd love to hear about your nostalgic memories of The Far Side and why you wanted to talk about it today.
So I don't remember when I initially discovered The Far Side. I want to say it's probably something that one of my friends from the neighborhood that I grew up in might have told me about it. And I remember when I was probably 8-9 years old buying one of those 365-day Far Side calendars from Spencer's Gifts or some shit in the mall near where I grew up. And I didn't have a traditional Far Side book. I don't even think that I discovered Far Side through newspaper comics or anything like that, comic strips. I think I literally just bought this calendar and just read it, which is something that you're not supposed to do with 365-day calendars. Just immediately read it like it was a book, and then picked my favorites, and then starred my favorites, and then set it down, and then used it for its actual purpose of being a calendar after I'd already read through the whole thing 5 or 6 times. So whenever I was sitting down and reading the strips, it was just a fun rerun. And then honestly, later in life, I think that The Far Side was really really key in developing my kind of comedic sensibilities. It's just a weird, offbeat, surrealist comic strip. But I feel later in life I realized a lot of weird similarities between me and Gary Larson that I just didn't know existed when I was just a kid reading this calendar over and over and over again. To the point that I think I literally after I tore all of the pages off the calendar, I think I saved every single page and stapled them together and read it as if it was a book for a while. But Gary Larson, also born in Southern Washington State. I was born in Southern Washington. He was born in Southern Washington. He went to Washington State University. I went to Washington State University. I didn't realize this until after I went there and I saw a giant Far Side mural in Beasley Coliseum, which is the basketball stadium that is at WSU. That's it's made by Gary Larson, and it says The Far Side of the State on it. And it's got all of his classic characters. And and I think that once I saw that, I realized that it's so clear that the references in his comic strips, he, I think, went to school for anthropology, agriculture, stuff like that. And it makes sense when you think about his strips that I think literally the reason that it's called The Far Side is that he grew up in Western Washington, and Eastern Washington, where WSU is located, is the far side of the state. Eastern Washington is a very agricultural heavy kind of region. So there's a lot of cows, farmers, and stuff like that, which are all just classic tropes of Far Side comics. And I think that he's even said he got a WSU a noted alumni award or something like that. And he even said that going to WSU was really key in developing his sense of humor. So for me reading that, after I graduated or while I was at WSU was just like such a cool thing to see. And then, sorry, I think there's music starting on one of my tabs open. Muting tab. It was to the point that when I graduated, I actually emailed Gary Larson to ask him, if I could get coffee with him or ask him for comedy advice or just tell him hey, I'm somebody who really looked up to you, and now I went to WSU, you went to WSU, I'm from Washington State, you're from Washington State, I'd love to just ask for comedy advice. And I got a response from his publisher that said, Gary Larson does not respond to fan mail. Please don't email us. So, I feel like I got the complete Gary Larson experience throughout. I really, really walked in his footsteps and then annoyed his publisher at the end.
I was surprised. I was like, oh, you got a response. It's going to be an amazing story. And I'm like, no, he is famously reclusive. So yeah. He just seems like such a. I mean, I don't know. I feel like so many cartoonists The Calvin and Hobbes guy is Bill Watterson.
Similar. Yeah, Bill Watterson is really similar in that once he retired, he was just nobody look at me, no photos,
Yeah, although both of them have resurfaced of late, because Gary Larson started posting new Far Side stuff on his website in the last couple of years, maybe around the time of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I know Bill Watterson, I saw he
has a new comic coming out.
It's like a horror graphic novel, something totally different.
Yeah, but it is I feel like for Gary Larson, the Far Side ended in 1995, I think.
Right.
It was
same year.
Mid to late.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah, mid to late 90s. And I remember for years the only time that Gary Larson would ever pop up in the news as angry environmentalist guy being quoted about why the whales should be saved or something like that. So it's he was. I mean, he's very much an environmentalist, which I'm sure you can see in Far Side Comics. But it's it was always oh, I miss funny Gary Larson and not mad at us for polluting Gary Larson.
Yeah. I don't remember the first time I encountered the Far Side. Specifically, I was very young, but the first job I ever wanted when I was a kid was I wanted to grow up to be an animator. And, I loved drawing cartoons. I took cartooning classes. And for me, the holy trinity of comic strips back then was Calvin and Hobbes, The Far Side, and Bloom County. Those three were pretty foundational in my sense of what was funny, and also the way which jokes could be delivered in a written visual medium like that. They all take very different approaches, and especially Gary Larson. A lot of the Far Side, sometimes the jokes jump right out at you, but other times it's all in just the weirdness of the composition. There's sort of a remove. There's a famous one that he got a lot of flack from just angry people reading the newspaper that didn't understand it, and it's called Cow Tools. And literally it's just a drawing of a cow, and he's standing in front of a bunch of these typically Gary Larson surreal looking tools. You can't tell what their function is, and one saw, and there's a barn in the background, and the caption says Cow Tools, and that's it. And people lost their minds trying to figure out what this joke was, and Gary Larson eventually had to weigh in and sort of no, that's the joke. Their tools are weird and alien to us. A cow society would have different tools. That's it. And sometimes that was all you got, these very, very dry, removed, abstract, weird things.
Yeah, I think that Gary Larson did such a good job of painting a picture of it's I think that he's talked about this in interviews, in that it's starting you at the midpoint. So, and it causes your imagination to really hit okay, what happened before this and what happened after this? For me, probably one of my favorite Far Side strips, which I remember I think I might have just tacked this up to my wall at some point when I was a kid, is a comic strip of a guy in a house standing on his porch, yelling at a dog in front of just a very poorly mowed lawn. And the text on it is, "You call that mowing the lawn? Bad dog. No biscuit. Bad dog." And it's just so funny to me to imagine, this guy trained this dog to mow the lawn, and the dog did he mowed the lawn, but he didn't do a good enough job mowing the lawn, and this guy's mad at him. So it's just so, I don't know, it's so good at dropping you in at just the right comedic moment,
Well, it's the way he structures it, right? Like, as you said, he's kind of expecting you to do a lot of the work to find where the joke is and where he's meeting you. And part of that is also because he is, like, with rare exception, it's one panel every time. And so he has to sort of, through the composition of the drawing and with his limited verbiage at the bottom, just draw you in to give you all the clues you need to decipher a joke. That is a very high level of expectation for your audience. And I learned a lot from just reading that, going like, oh, okay, you can write a joke where, it's not a classic Borscht Belt setup and punchline. Like they want you to do that work.
Yeah, it's sort of like in sketch comedy terms, they're just like perfect little blackout sketches, where it's just like lights up, you see something that is insane without context, you get the slightest bit of context, and then it just ends. And it's just such an efficient and cool way to do comedy. And I think it's really cool to see, like, I feel like, even in modern comedy strips, it's like, I feel like modern Heathcliff kind of takes a lot of cues from the Far Side, in that, like, they'll just have these weird, insane one-panel strips that, like, don't really have a setup, and they don't really have a punchline. It's just a weird thing, and you kind of go mad adding in the context yourself. Like, do you know Garbage Ape, or you heard of Garbage Ape?
I believe I've seen some Garbage Ape, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. So, like, now this podcast is about Garbage Ape.
All right.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, like Garbage Ape, I think, is another thing that it's very Gary Larson in that it's just like a photo of an ape with a garbage can, and he's wearing like a helmet that says meat, and then the text at the bottom says, like, the children rejoice the arrival of Garbage Ape, and then there's like children clapping, and it's just like, right. Okay, it's like, it just paints such a weird image of this world that, I don't know, it's just like I think that for me, even talking about it, it's like, I think that, like, this is really good. It's really good early comedy writing training to read Far Side, because, like, it's kind of on you to give the strips their own punchline, which is just good training,
Yeah, they let your imagination run wild in ways that like no other comic strip of that time or before had done. Even the really good ones. Like, I love Calvin and Hobbes. I love Bloom County. Those, like I said, those were huge for me. But they don't do this very much. They don't work in that mode. Like, Gary Larson stuff is so cerebral. It's almost like a Mitch Hedberg joke or something. It's real, like, dry one-liner stuff. And a guy like Mitch Hedberg could get away with, like, giving you that one line and then saying nothing and just waiting for the audience to catch up with him. That's what this feels like.
Well, yeah, I feel like most comic strips, like, even though it's only a few panels, it's like, Calvin and Hobbes, there was still some effort to tell a story, like, or at least give you some context of, like, a moment or of a scene, whereas just, like, Gary Larson was like, you figure it out. Here's, like, a sandwich pushing another sandwich into a lunchroom, like, with the text, the sandwich mafia sends Luigi to sleep with the fourth graders. Yeah, you get it. This is a world where, like, sandwiches are the mob and fourth graders are like sharks, and you blah, 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 It's like, it lets you fill in the blanks in a really fun way.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is kind of the magic of how it works. And, like, he's doing so much to sort of tie his hands behind his back, right? Because not only is he doing this with one panel, he also has no real recurring characters either. And so every new thing is a fresh thing. There's sort of like these people that you will see, like, oh, that looks like the same farmer with the glasses I've seen before, but they're not like characters with any name. They don't have a name. There's no depth. If they are given a name in that one strip, it won't be the same name they have the next time you see them, 38 strips from now. So you don't have any of that familiarity to bank on, where, like, in Calvin and Hobbes, when you can sort of use, like, oh, that's a very Calvin thing to say, right? You can rely on their characters for part of the comedy. Gary Larson saying, no, everything is just this one weird observation at a time.
Yeah. Now I'm really curious about, like, what was the last Far Side strip? Because I feel like
I know that one. I looked it up for today. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I feel like there's some effort, like, with, Calvin and Hobbes, Peanuts, and all that stuff. There was some effort to, like, tie things up and, like, leave you feeling good about where the characters are. Whereas, like, the Far Side, it's like, what's he, I don't know, there aren't characters.
They actually did it as well. He did it as well as you possibly could because with that constraint. So the last Far Side comic, it's actually a 2-panel one. And it's the Wizard of Oz. So it's like this. It's Gary Larson himself about to talking to Glinda the Good Witch, and surrounding the platform he's standing on are all of the it's the cow and the caveman and all these characters he draws over and over again. And the Glinda is saying something. Well, Gary, we'll miss you. Go. You're going back. And the next panel is him waking up in bed like Dorothy, and saying, oh, and I was in this crazy place, and you were there, and you were there. It's like, I don't know how else you could have done it better to wrap that up without any real characters or story.
But that is a very, I don't know, it's like putting in your improv hat. That's very just like, tag out, well, it was a crazy dream you had.
It fits with like the motif of, right, this is the Far Side. It's a strange world where things are weird, but he's going back to
but it's kind of it's like, I mean, I'm sure you remember that in improv where it's like something crazy would happen and then somebody would tag you out and say like, whoa, you didn't take your crazy pills, or just like, anyway, that's the weird screenplay I was pitching or whatever. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is F you, Gary Larson, come up with a better ending.
Yeah, that is the stuff they beat out of you in your first improv classes. Like, don't pull a gun, don't tell everyone they're crazy and it's not happening. Yeah. Although props to Gary Larson, I'm looking at the strip now. There's randomly just a giant snake in this guy's bed. Yeah, his real world he goes back to, I don't think is exactly the real world. It's still pretty Gary Larson-y.
Yeah.
Although I like the idea that this whole thing was like literally was a fever dream that he's like madly scribbling.
Yeah, for sure. But it's, I don't know, it's like, I think that of all of the newspaper comic strips, I feel like the Far Side is the one where you can really feel like the creative branch, family tree, like all of the branches that came off of the Far Side. Like, things like The Simpsons. The Simpsons is very Far Side at times. There's, like Perry Bible Fellowship feels like
I was going to bring them up. Yeah.
It's like, it's just, that feels like it's the Far Side, but like for the internet, and it came out like, 10 years afterwards, after the Far Side.
Yeah. I love Perry Bible Fellowship. If you haven't found it, go to pbfcomics.com, which it's extremely funny. It's extremely well drawn. That guy is incredibly skilled. And, it's a similar thing. He'll do multiple. He won't do always single frame things. It's a lot of multiple frames, but there is sort of that same level of like, there's a little bit of an edge and there's like an abstraction to it sometimes that, again, he's also trusting you to kind of meet him halfway in the joke.
Yeah, I guess that like what I really love about all this stuff, like I would say things like the Far Side, Perry Bible Fellowship, is it's sort of like, I'm a big fan of Garfield, but it feels like by design, Jim Davis was trying to go for the most broad audience that he possibly could. Like I think that the early Garfield strips were, I think that early Garfield was literally called John or something like that, and it was about John Arbuckle. He was a cartoonist, and he also happened to have this cat, and then I think he got the note from like another famous cartoonist at the time of like, you should just make it about the cat. Like, people like cats. Like, people like talking animals. And then he switched, made it more about Garfield, and then it like blew up as a big success. So that feels like something where the goal was to make it for as much of a mainstream audience as possible. Whereas the Far Side was just like, want to see some weird bullshit? Like, it's like, I feel like things like Cow Tools, which you mentioned, it's like, there's not a world where Gary Larson was like, everybody will get this one. Like, I think that, like, I like that it is kind of like, hey, weirdos, here's a comic series just for you,
He feels like he's on this continuum with guys like Frank Zappa, almost, like, here's some weird music for you. And have you ever read any of the stuff that B. Cliben put out?
B. Cliben, that name's really familiar.
So he's known for doing a lot of like cat drawings, but basically he is the
I've seen B. Cliben, yeah,
he's like, if Gary Larson is Homo sapiens, Gary Larson is Homo erectus. Like he's just a little farther back on the
Or B.
evolutionary.
Cliven is Homo erectus.
Or B. Cliven is, yeah. He's the earlier point in the evolution of this stuff. Because I remember reading The Far Side as a kid, and my dad going, hey, if you like this, check this out. And he had some B. Cliven books. He has one the one that comes to mind is it's called Never Eat Anything Bigger Than Your Head. And the cartoon is literally just figure one, guy with, like a meatball on his fork. And figure two, a guy with like a meatball on his fork that's bigger than his head. And that's it. It's just, again, very similar vibe, very similar way of like delivering these weird jokes. His art style is very different. It looks more like R. Crumb drawings. And sometimes it would get a little more risque in terms of, I think he'd put like boobs and stuff in his cartoons that Gary Larson could not get away with. But
Gary Larson desperately wanted to. Gary Larson, every moment of Gary Larson's life, he was like, what if this cow had boobs?
Well, they're all out there, right? They're udders. That's what they're doing. But
that's fair. Yeah.
But like, if you feel like, hey, I've exhausted all the Far Side, go read B. Cliven stuff, because it's like, there is a very clear link between that stuff and the Far Side.
Well, I think that like comics, like newspaper comics people are. It feels like you have to be like a very specific type of creative weirdo to create newspaper comics, because you're churning something out like every day, like if not, I think you might take Saturdays off, but like 6 days a week you've got a comic you're churning out. You and I have a background in like live comedy, things like improv, stand up, sketch, and stuff like that, where you can get like an audience's sense of if something is funny. Whereas I feel like with any sort of newspaper comic artist, like by your nature you're kind of reclusive. Like you're not like reading your Far Side comic strip to an audience to see if like it's good or not. You're just kind of like going off of your own intuition. That like it's like, has Gary Larson ever stood up in front of a stage and told jokes? Like probably not. Like and it kind of makes sense when you think about it like that. Of like Gary Larson, the Calvin and Hobbes creator Bill Watterson, like just hitting a point where they're like, I'm done, like, because they're not chasing like the dopamine spike of laughs from an audience. They're just like, well, I've entertained myself enough. Bye,
Totally. And there's also a very different process and method to the way that a joke is being delivered here. As you said, it's not live. It's not meant to be read out loud. I think of guys like Douglas Adams writing The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and like, That's a really funny book. But you have to think, if you're Douglas Adams, like, well, I outside of, the rare book reading where I am going to read this out loud, I have to make sure this joke is funny as you read it in your own head. And it's such a different medium that way. And guys like Gary Larson, it feels like he is sort of not thinking of the audience in a way. He's truly in that box of his own making and going like, what do I think is funny? I'll just do that. And if you guys think it's funny too, you'll come along with me. But he seems to be definitely just like, I'm writing for me, what makes me laugh.
Well, yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, when I think it is like, it's like, I think that it's so interesting to see like using, Gary Larson and Jim Davis as, I think, like kind of opposite ends of the spectrum of like Jim Davis is still writing Garfield comics. It's like he's been writing Garfield for 40 years, maybe more. And it feels like Jim Davis kind of understands Garfield as like a product. So, it's like, does Jim Davis think that every Garfield strip that he writes is funny? Like, I don't know, maybe not. But like, I think that at a certain point, it's like Jim Davis is like, Garfield is my job. Like, this is the thing that I do, 6 days a week. Like I end every strip with him saying that he hates Mondays and likes lasagna. And that's relatable to people because everybody loves lasagna or whatever, It feels like Jim Davis is writing Garfield with an audience in mind. And I think that that's why he's kept doing it, is he like understands that he's creating a product for people other than himself. Whereas I think that Gary Larson, like, he said that one of the reasons that he stopped doing The Far Side is that he just felt like if he kept doing it, he would be repeating jokes. And that's like, he's writing entirely for himself, in a way that's like honestly kind of like cool to see, in that like, he's just like, well, this does not entertain me anymore to do, and I'm writing this kind of for an audience of one, I'm not trying to sell like Far Side T-shirts or whatever. So like, you know, that it makes sense as to why he would just like say like, well, I'm gonna put my pin away. Like, goodbye, everybody. You know.
Yeah, he said something about you're not wanting to go to the graveyard of mediocre cartoons, and
Yeah.
go out on top. And he had already made a bajillion dollars selling those calendars you talked about, and
Yeah, totally.
mugs and T-shirts and everything else. And so he certainly had the financial freedom to walk away. But yeah, you're right. Like he doesn't. When you talk about like this is accessible, like a strip like Garfield or Marmaduke would deal with exactly some of the same tropes that Gary Larson would. He would take the most basic trope in the world, right? Dogs and mailmen don't get along, and he would find a way to come at that from an angle that would be so different as to be
Right.
unique. It's not just like oh, Garfield, you eat a lot. It would be something else.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's like it is just really. I don't know. It's like I think that there are admirable things about both sides of it. I think that I think it's cool that Jim Davis like clearly looks at creativity as like a craft. Like it's just he's building a shelf every day, and like that shelf is named Garfield. And it's just his job, and he's got to do it. Whereas I feel like Gary Larson is somebody that's like more concerned with the art of it. And that's not to say that Jim Davis isn't like a weirdo. Like I don't know. It's like there's so many, like Garfield books and Garfield strips that he's done where it's clear like, oh, you're like a really good introspective comedy writer. Like Garfield's 9 Lives I think is an example of like a book that he wrote that was like, it was 9 different Garfield stories of Garfield throughout the ages. So here was Garfield if he was a caveman. Here's Garfield in space, and it's like these really different stories. And I think that there's the Garfield series that they released, I think, like around Halloween, where like it felt like, oh, is Garfield dead? Has he been dead for 20 years? And he woke up in an abandoned house. Like Jim Davis, he wrote like a Galactus comic for Marvel that's just like Galactus eating planets like the lasagna or whatever, and so I do think that with Jim Davis, there is just this like, there is this funny creative spark that exists, but I think that he's also just a guy that like looks at Garfield as his job and isn't necessarily, worried about having like everything be a piece of art. Whereas I do feel like Gary Larson was just like so much more concerned about like, is it good, and I don't know. It's like both sides of it. I think that I respect both sides of it a lot. But it is cool that like there is something cool about Gary Larson being like, I'm done.
Yeah, it's that classic art versus commerce debate.
Yeah,
and
totally.
he's
totally.
clearly
Yeah.
on the art side of it. While we're on that subject, talking about the art itself, since this is a visual thing, it's hard to do on a podcast. But he has such a unique art style. I mean, it's instantly recognizable. It's very odd. It's almost hard to put into words, but like all the people are like these like tombstone shaped,
Yeah.
people with these like very sort of elongated heads and noses and tiny eyes, and and that sort of extends out to these animal characters or even like space aliens and stuff. It's a really odd aesthetic, but it's kind of neat.
Oh yeah, for sure. You could definitely look at a Gary Larson drawing and immediately clock it as a Gary Larson drawing, regardless of whether you can see his name on it or not. I don't know. It's just I think that like he's a guy that like I genuinely I totally understand he's a reclusive weirdo. That's why he did not respond to my email. But I also feel like he would be a really cool guy to talk to about like creativity for an hour.
Yeah, well, his approach is, as we sort of said, like he it's extremely thoughtful because again, to draw one of these things and think about the text, he's got to think about that joke. He's got to think. He spends a lot of time on the composition, right? Because you could think of like, how do I visually represent this joke? There's probably 50 different ways to do it. But he's thought very carefully because, again, he has to give you those clues. Sometimes it's just about an expression on a character's face, the way something is in the foreground versus the background. So there's a ton of thought and care put into every single frame of this thing.
Yeah, but there's also like, did you read any of his new Far Sides that he released in 2020?
A handful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he made very many of them. I remember when the first three came out and being really excited to read them, but I think that he might have just like stopped at those three or something. But it was the way that he went about it and the way he described it was so interesting because, like, this came out in 2020. This was 25 years after his last Far Side comic. Like outside of like I think he did like a New Yorker cover in 2003. He hadn't really done a lot of like art in the public sphere, and specifically had not written like a new Far Side comic in a while. So that he just like dropped these on his website, like, in the way that he did it was like, well, like, I don't know, I bought a new digital tablet and like thought it'd be fun to draw some stuff, so here you go. It's like it was with like zero fanfare. Like there was no like, oh, it's been 25 years and my fans have been wanting to know about the Far Side. It was just like, I don't know, it was like every time I draw my ink pens get clogged, so I got this tablet and had some fun, like, and it's kind of like, can you imagine like if a Star Wars movie came out like that? Like it's like, this is, imagine it's like it's 1995 and George Lucas has not made a Star Wars movie in 12 years and the prequel trilogy does not exist. And he was just like, I bought a digital camera and made a new Star Wars. Here you go. And it's like, what? Like this thing I've been waiting for like 25 years, So I don't know. It's like he's just such a such a weirdo in a way that I really appreciate.
He definitely ticks that box of like, he's an eccentric.
Yeah,
but in only in certain ways, because I don't get the sense that he's like. He's not an eccentric in the way of like he's going to be, hawking, vaginal eggs like Gwyneth Paltrow, or he's going to be.
Although if he sold vaginal eggs, I'd for sure buy a Gary Larson vaginal egg.
It'd probably be shaped like a chicken, sort of,
Yeah, it'd be it would have a really funny on the box. They would say like cow tools or some shit. Yeah. And it would be great. Yeah.
But yeah, he's not the kind of person that's like, oh, he's gonna, show up, high on mescaline at some like art gallery somewhere. The kind of things you think of like celebrities being weird and doing. Like his eccentricism is all just like, I find oddball things funny, but now I'm going to go just back to my house and garden for a while. I don't picture him doing that much weird stuff in his downtime, for the last 30 years.
Yeah, well, this is something that I often think about, just like, living in Hollywood and working in the entertainment industry. Is I definitely feel like there are people that are like true eccentrics, and then I think that there are people that just like want to be weird because it'll get them noticed or whatever. And I don't get the impression with, like I would say with Bill Watterson and Gary Larson, I don't get the impression that they're like trying to be weird when they won't do interviews. I think it's just like they're probably like fairly introverted people. They like have their lives that they like, like they have their gardens or whatever. And like anything that kind of tips that apple cart, they're just like, nah, I don't need it. Like I have Calvin and Hobbes. I have Calvin peeing on things, sticker money. I don't have to talk to you,
Although I've heard he did not sanction that, so I don't know if he gets any Calvin peeing on things sticker money from that, which...
he gets the pride of it existing.
Right. Thank God my beloved character is peeing on everything.
Yeah, is peeing on a Ford truck, like, or whatever.
It is probably the height of political discourse, I think, is to have Calvin peeing on, Biden 2024, or whatever they've put it on.
I really want to see if like there's a sticker that exists that's just Calvin peeing into a urinal. That's just like, yeah, take that, urinals.
I think at this point you have to take it surreal, like Calvin peeing on a smaller Calvin who's peeing on a smaller.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, so did you eventually come around to getting any of those Far Side collections or no?
No. So I need to. It's like I know that there exists like like multiple book anthologies of the Far Side that are like, gold encrusted and stuff like that. And I feel like that's definitely like something that I need to get at some point in the future. I just like, I haven't look, I don't like him that much. No, it's like, I feel like there are things like that where like, the internet exists, which I know is like, I know Gary Larson hates that his comics are posted on the internet, and he's like, that's another like specific weird thing is like he really came out hard. His rare public comments from like probably 2000 to like 2018 or something like that were entirely about asking people to not create Far Side fan sites, and to not put his comics on the internet, on Twitter or anything like that. I think that he described it as like, you know, he described it as like when your kid like runs away from home and then you see pictures of your kid and they're just like, they went where, you know, which is such like an archaic but also kind of like pure way to look at the internet. And I'm sure from his perspective, it's like he probably pays all of his bills with Far Side books, so it's like he's probably like, no, don't make a fan site. That's going to prevent you from buying my like $200 like, you know, gold encrusted Far Side anthology or whatever, you know. Yeah, I don't own any Far Side books, but it's definitely on my like, at some point in my life I will get a very nice, like, you know, I think there's like a 2-volume Far Side collection that's just like very nice and crazy that I need to get at some point.
I've seen one. Yeah, it's like 3 volumes, and it looks like it's got like a cowhide sort of art style.
Yeah, I think the pages are like gilded or something.
Yeah, and it's all 4,300 and some odd strips. I don't know if it goes all the way back to the early days when it was still called Nature's Way. They might have that stuff in there too. I have 2 of them sitting next to me, these little ones that like, because like I said, when I was a kid, I was obsessed, and so anytime I'd go into a bookstore, it's like, oh, let me go to the section where all the like the comic strip collections are. Is there a new Calvin and Hobbes one to get? Is there a new Far Side? So next to me, I asked my mom to go into my old room and see what was there and pull a few so I could look at them to prepare for this. So I've got the Far Side Observer, I've got that one, and Valley of the Far Side just sitting here.
Nice.
And it's like, yeah, they're perfect. I'm curious to see how my kids react to them. Because my daughter likes Calvin and Hobbes. She's been into that one. This is much more abstract and weird, so I don't know how she's going to feel about it. But going back and looking at them, I was like, oh God, there's so many. Did you have any particular favorites?
Oh yeah, I mentioned the you know, my favorite being the, you know, you call that mowing the lawn, bad dog, no biscuit, bad dog. You know, the sandwich mafia sends Luigi to sleep with the 4th graders. There's the classic like school for the gifted one of the kid pushing the pole sign. You know, I mean, there's just like, I feel like, I don't know, there's just like so many classics. Yeah, it's I don't know, what are your favorite Far Side comics?
God, I'm trying to you pinged the most, probably the best known one, which is that, yeah, it says like the Midvale School for the Gifted, and there's this kid just shoving as hard as he can on the door to push it, and it says pull on the door. That, to me, that's probably like, if you were going to show somebody one Far Side comic, that's the one to show them. God, there's so many. I mean, it's, to me, what I can't remember individual strips. I just remember so many like recurring themes where it's like, okay, let's do the bit with the guy on the desert island, right? Let's do the caveman. So here's one that was fun. I found out about. So there's this one where Caveman is giving like a presentation. He's got like a slideshow, and he's showing the tail of a stegosaurus.
Oh yeah, I was just going to bring this one up.
Yeah, and he says like, you know, this is, you know, this, we're calling this the Thagamizer after Thag, who was killed by it, or I forget what the text is.
Yeah.
But then paleontologists who also did not have an actual like name for that part of the dinosaur started calling it the Thagamizer because of this strip.
Yeah, I think that it is the technical name for the pointy tail of the Stegosaurus now, due to Gary Larson. And just like a funny story, I was writing. Actually, yeah, sure. I'll shout him out and I'll talk about it. I was freelancing on like a Netflix kids series called Ridley Jones, which is a really great show you can watch on Netflix, created by Chris Nee. And one of the writers on the show is a really funny writer named Kent Redeker, who has created a lot of really great kid shows, like Higglytown Heroes was his show, which came out in the mid 2000s, and he's, you know, written on just like name a kid show over the past 20 years, and he's probably written on it. And he, in one of his Ridley Jones scripts, snuck in like just referring to a Stegosaurus' tail as a Thagamizer. It's just like, that's my Thagamizer, or something like that. And I read that and I was like, oh, that's a Far Side reference. And he's like, you know it is. Like, you know. So, yeah. I
mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's like observations about animals. And the one that springs to mind, there's that classic one that says something like, you know, what dogs are actually saying. And it's just dogs, you know, like out in the neighborhood, riding in a car. And it's just the word, hey, 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 hey. That's all they're saying to each other. And I like that is a perfect Far Side joke of like, yeah, that's it. The dogs don't have anything to say. A bark is what you think it is. It's just hay.
Yeah, there's also another one, what we say to dogs, and it's like, all they hear is like, blah, 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 their name, blah, 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 their name, blah, 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 you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is something where, like, you know, it's like looking back and looking back at these, you know, Far Side strips, even just over the past, you know, couple hours before recording this, it is, like, I can definitely track, like, you know, sketches that I wrote when I was doing a lot of, like, live sketch comedy that's like, oh, this is just a Far Side strip. Like, you know, like, I feel like it's like, I'm not sure if you have things like this, but it's like, it's so ingrained in my comedy DNA that it's like, you kind of don't even think about it until you, like, actually look at those strips and you're like, oh, yeah, I, like, flat out, like, this is just me doing my version of a Far Side strip, but in a half-page stage sketch, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes they're just like, they're literally sort of like dad jokes.
Yeah.
Like, I'm flipping through this one just now as we're talking. There's one here. It shows, so it's a close-up of the top of a guy's head, like his just a regular, like standard men's haircut. And there's two cowboys standing inside of it. And it says, say, ain't you a stranger in this part? As in, like, the part in his hair. And it's like, okay, you it's really just like one weird wordplay joke. And it's just like, there's something about, like, it's hard to say, like, oh, he really commits to the bit because it's just a simple one panel drawing. But there's something about, like, yeah, like the only way you make a dad joke deliverable and make it land is this, like, level of weird sincerity.
There's a strip. This one is a rare Far Side strip that does not have any text associated with it. It's just of like a cat. It's like it's a pet store. It says Bob's Pets on the window. There's a cat sitting near the cash register that has like two peg legs for its front legs, and then in the foreground is a fish tank that says Piranha, $29, and it's like, aw. You look at that and you're like, that cat trying to eat the piranha.
It's a sad little short story, right?
Yeah.
He has a sense of the macabre too. Like I said, the stuff isn't risque.
Oh yeah,
it's not risque, but occasionally it does get morbid. And like again, it seems, you know, totally G-rated as you look at it. But if you let your imagination wander just a little bit farther, you realize like, no, that is pretty dark, right? Like somebody got their leg chopped off or whatever.
Yeah, I'm looking at another one. It's of a bunch of demons in hell, and like the demons are making a bunch of people like, you know, work with pitchforks and stuff like that. And there's this one guy who just like seems really happy and he's whistling as he's like pushing a crate of coal. And the text is, you know, we're just not reaching that guy. And it's like,
that's perfect. Yeah, again, a great. Another one springs to mind now that I'm thinking about it. It's three old dudes sitting on a porch. And one guy is, you know, his like knee is like swelled up, and he's like, "Oh, it's gonna rain because my trick knee is acting up." And the next guy has like his elbow or something. Oh, my trick elbow is acting up. And then the next guy, just his entire head is gigantic, and it's like, "Oh, there goes Bob," or whatever. Something like that. It's again like the amount of like that is a joke. That is like a, you know, a rule of three joke. Somehow worked out into a single panel.
Yeah, I've also got a shout out. It's like I love flipping through these because it is it's like nostalgia. It's nostalgic to look at Far Side comics for me, but it's also like, oh, these are just good jokes. Like I'm looking at a panel of like it's three bears in a cave, clearly two kid bears and one adult bear. The adult bear is holding the skulls of two humans and sitting on a pile of their bones. And it's clearly like the bear is putting on a puppet show with these human skulls. And the caption is, okay, one more time and it's off to bed for both of you. Hey, Bob, think there are any bears in this old cave? I don't know, Jim. Let's take a look. Like, it's just, oh, yeah. The before, you immediately imagine the before and after this, and it's horrifying, but also hilarious.
Right. The two guys wandered into the cave, and now this is the bedtime story that this bear is telling over and over. We want to hear the story again about the two guys that wandered into the cave.
Yeah, using their decapitated skulls as puppets.
Yeah, again, you figure all of that out just from the, you know, like one line of text and a drawing. And It's brilliant. Like there's no other way to look at. Like I don't know that I would have the ability to do this. I tried writing a comic strip when I was in junior high, writing for our junior high paper, but like it was much more traditional. It had recurring animal characters, and like the Far Side, there were jokes that nobody understood, but that's because they were bad, not because. So I tried, but I never. I will say I drew a lot of. I mean, I still draw a lot. I doodle a lot, but like I would remember, like I'd finish up a math test or something, and if I had 7 minutes left on the clock, then I would flip the paper over and I would draw. I'd try to draw some kind of a one-panel strip like that on the back, and never did I achieve Larson levels of brilliance, but I just remember being so inspired that I'm like, I wanted to do this for no other reason than like I have time and I want to try.
Yeah, no, I honestly I had a similar creative thing that I did when I was in college. I would every class that I took, like this was like I didn't have like a nice laptop at the time, so I used just like a notepad. And what I would always do when taking my notes in college is I would write like whatever class it was, like English 101 or whatever, and then I would do a dash next to the date, and then I would just write like a one-liner joke, or just, and like, yeah, most of them sucked, but like it is sort of something that's just like, it just kind of like gets your brain going, and it's fun to kind of like work in that space,
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a challenge to try and write a joke like this. It's not as simple as like doing a sketch or even saying I'm going to draw a 3-panel or a 4-panel comic. Right? You have to adopt all of his constraints and then see if you can make it work.
And something that's like I know we touched on this a little bit ago, but something that just makes me think about like. I feel like with Calvin and Hobbes and with Garfield and with a lot of pre-existing comic strips, you have kind of character tropes that you can just sort of use as like an easy out if you can't think of a joke. So it's just like, Garfield's lazy and he hates Mondays. Okay, cool. I can't think of an out for a third panel for the strip, so I'll just lean on him being lazy and hating Mondays. Whereas with Gary Larson, it's like there's not characters, so there's not like character tropes you can lean on. So it's like you couldn't really phone it in a way that like, and like I'm speaking as somebody where it's like, if you're writing for characters that and especially characters that exist in the popular culture, you can kind of lean on sometimes like, oh, if you can't think of a funny joke or a funny way to end a scene or a sketch or a story or whatever, you can just lean on like the character does their character thing, and it's really like admirable that Gary Larson doesn't really have anything like that he can lean on. So he just had to swing for the fences every time, there's not like a Far Side catchphrase that he could just use,
Yeah, there's no catchphrases, there's no continuity, there's not even like, Calvin and Hobbes would occasionally go for like an emotional moment with him and his parents or his best bud. There's none of that. Right, it's like
with the Simpsons. It's like Homer can just say "dough" if they can't think of a good joke, and it's like Gary Larson never had anything like that.
No, yeah. Again, this whole thing. It was really interesting to go back and then watch the Tales from the Far Side Halloween special, which you can find. I don't know if you can find the whole thing outright, but you can find chunks of this on YouTube. There was an animated special that was done to try and actually mimic some of the success of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes, and I think they do capture the tone of this stuff largely because there's almost no dialogue. It's largely, there's silence, there's some like grumbling or animal noises, but almost no spoken words in the whole thing, and it gives the whole affair just this very surreal vibe that like, yeah, that is the tone of the Far Side. It works.
So I just saw a Far Side comic that came out, honestly, the week I was born, that I'm really excited to read for you. It's two explorers in the jungle. They're flipping through a journal, and around them are just like, tattered remains of like a tattered explorer shirt, journal pages on the ground, a boot. Like clearly this is a scene where something happened. And the text is, "Here's the last entry in Carlson's journal. Having won their confidence, tomorrow I shall test the humor of these giant but gentle primates with a simple joy buzzer handshake." And it's like, oh, clearly this guy tried that and then got mauled to death, you know?
Right. Again, the perfect level of like it's like G-rated, but also, you know, just totally just horrific.
Yeah, but it's sort of like it's G-rated, but like it's clearly like the moment before, the moment after was very R-rated.
Yeah, exactly. All of that like horrific stuff, it exists in your mind as you read it. It's not out in front of you. And that, again, it's really a magic trick for him to be able to do that and just say like, yeah, we're just going to show you this one snapshot of these people in time and let you create the rest of the timeline yourself.
Yeah, well, no, I think a magic trick is a really good way to put it, and it is very, I don't know, it's just he's good at what he does. I mean, like it's part of me kind of, you know, wishes that he didn't like retire for 25 years, but another part of me appreciates that he was just like, oh, nope, can't top what I've done. Might as well go garden for 25 years or whatever, you know?
Yeah, you know, he's right. He did avoid going to the graveyard of mediocre cartoons because who knows?
Yeah.
How would those 20, 25 years of cartoons have turned out? Maybe it would have been just as good as the earlier stuff, but you know, the more often than not, I mean, the batting average for any comedic endeavor that goes on that long, you know, very rare for it to hold up. You know, so he probably made the right call for himself. And looking back at it, it's such a wonderful like comedic shorthand. Like I will constantly quote The Simpsons, because what The Simpsons really does well is they look at a situation that we kind of encounter and they find a way to take or like a metaphor and distill it down into like one joke. So when it's so often it's like, oh, when are we going to get to the fireworks factory? Right.
Yeah.
If you know that, you know what it is from The Simpsons. And it's just emblematic of like, I'm waiting for something exciting to happen. And, you know, when is it going to happen? Oh, it's never going to happen. This is, you know, that's what that means in that episode of the show. And The Far Side is kind of a similar thing where like, there's almost a Far Side comic for every occasion that you could pull.
Yeah. I just Googled Gary Larson. What do you think his net worth is? Just out of curiosity.
Oh God, I don't know. 75 million.
Honestly, 70 million.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah, you're pretty close. Yeah. I mean, it was estimated at 50 million in 2012. Wow, I guess sold a lot of calendars.
And made some good investments, I assume.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, like I said, he earned it. He made something beloved that is like, it's funny reading back on like, so when he was very early in his career, like there was like an inflection point where The Far Side almost didn't happen, where he had been selling these comics to a local newspaper and he was trying to get to a bigger one. And they said, well, you can't, we won't do it until you're syndicated. And somehow it was like he managed to get the syndication and then got that job the same week he was fired from the earlier job. So like he said, like if I had gotten fired and I hadn't gotten the gig, that would have been it. But they happened in like the same week. And apparently the reason he got fired was because they were getting lots of complaints at this newspaper about like people, you know, being either offended or not understanding it. And I can understand maybe people not getting it sometimes, but the offensive part is mind blowing to me because none of it seems offensive.
Yeah, but this is also like 1987, or no, this is probably
this
like
would have been like
1982.
80, yeah, even earlier. It might have been 79, something like
where
that.
It's just like a cow that talks, like, you know.
Blasphemy.
Yeah, totally.
So as we're kind of rounding into the end here, why do you think The Far Side has endured the way it has?
I mean, I think that The Far Side, there is nothing topical about The Far Side. You know, there's not like an O.J. Simpson Far Side comic strip. You know, I think that what I think is really great about it as a series is that it's just these like perfect little encapsulated weird jokes that kind of exist out of time, but by doing that are also like timeless and evergreen in a specific way. Like, you know, I was flipping through all these Far Side strips, you know, just as we were talking, and it's like there isn't a single one that feels dated. You know, they all feel very, you know, it's like you could throw these on Twitter and they would immediately, go viral if Gary Larson was 23 right now, and there's something really cool about that. Like, do you know, kind of semi-related, are you, like, how familiar are you with, like, Mr. Show?
A little bit. I've watched it here and there.
So, Mr. Show, that was Bob Odenkirk and David Cross's sketch show, and it came out around the same time as The State, which was another really good sketch show that came out on MTV. And The State it was on MTV, it leaned really hard into pop culture. They would do sketches that's just like, I don't know, like Eddie Vedder says a weird thing or whatever, and because of that, The State, it feels so like early to mid 90s. Like, it just feels very like dated in a specific way. Whereas Mr. Show, like, they had a specific goal in mind that they did not use any real characters or real references, to the point that, like, I think they have, like, Jesus Christ in an episode, but his name's Jeepers Creepers or something. So it's like, even Jesus, they will not say Jesus's name because they're like, that would date us, And, though I know Farside has, like, God and like the devils and stuff like that, it's like, I think that because it's just so, like, timeless, and it didn't lean on references. It, it was just these, like, weird thoughts from this crazy guy. And, I think that because of that, it is just, like, this really, like, these timeless, perfect, like, little nuggets of comedy,
I think that's exactly right. You're dead on about the timelessness thing, because, again, I was reading them too in preparation for this and going, like, there's no reason you couldn't publish this today. There's a reason people were still, buying calendars and collections of these things now, because these jokes still work, because our society hasn't changed radically enough to make them feel dated or, even though they all came out in the 80s and 90s. And there's something kind of comforting about that. It's like, it's comedy that it's edgy without having, a political slant, and, like, no matter who you are or where you come from, I feel like there's a comic in here for you. There is something you will respond to. There's something very human about it, despite how, like, weird and, like, not warm and fuzzy or emotional, right? There's no characters to glom onto. There's no, touchy-feely observations about the human condition. Everything is this just abstract, weird, observational humor. And because of that, like, yeah, these observations are timeless and will continue to work. And so, like I said, I'm excited to show this to my kids, and I have no worries that they'll get it. I love Bloom County, but Bloom County is all topical. Bloom County is, mostly, it's a lot of, like, I remember reading a lot of that where, there's a whole plot line involving Madonna. There is, scarily enough, a whole thing about predicting Trump being president in there. There's all kinds of stuff in Bloom County that, like, I think is funny, but only because I grew up in the 80s to know what the hell he's talking about. And this has none of that. Like you said, it's just like, man, cows are weird.
yeah, basically. It's like, yep, they sure are. Yeah, it's like, what's real weird? If sandwiches could talk, like, it's like, sure. Yeah, I don't know. It is just, I don't know. It's like, it's such a big fan of The Far Side. And I think that, like, there's this book that's really great about, I think it's called, like, I want to say it's like Finding Springfield or something like that. It's a book about how The Simpsons originally started as a counterculture show, and now it's so popular that it is culture. So the things that The Simpsons did that were, like, weird alt comedy stuff in the 80s and 90s is now just comedy and culture and stuff like that. And it is kind of like what happens when counterculture just becomes culture. And I think that The Far Side is, like, kind of in this, like, even just as we're reading through it, as to, like, guys who came up through the alt comedy scene, it's like, it does feel like, The Far Side probably was very, 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 very weird in, like, 1982 comedy terms, when, like, Johnny Carson was still on the airwaves and all of that. But, like, you look at it now and it's like, oh, it feels like The Far Side has, The Far Side has influenced so many comedians who are now mainstream comedians now. You know, things like Rick and Morty and stuff like that. It's just like the idea of like comedy being weird exists in the public consciousness in a way that it maybe didn't in the 70s or whatever. And, I think that because of that, it's like looking at it, it kind of feels like society probably gets the Far Side more now than it did in 1984, just because like the culture has shifted in such a way to where what was just like way too weird in the 80s is now just like, oh, it's like a little bit weird, but not crazy, you know?
Yeah, and like there's a famous scene in Cheers that I found looking for stuff on YouTube where they're trying to explain a Far Side comic to Woody. There's a Simpsons joke where Homer, does not get, he's just literally flipping through them, going like, I don't get it. And you're right. Like, I feel like now, like, because the Far Side has kind of taught us how to understand the Far Side, and all of the stuff that's sprung from it, again, like you said, counterculture becoming culture. It feels like Gary Larson almost unlocked something for us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Yeah, like the Far Side is just good stuff all around.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. The Far Side is good.
Yeah. In closing, the Far Side, A-okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, Joey, can you tell our listeners where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thanks again for having me, Doug. It's always so fun to be on this podcast. You can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and BlueSky at Joey Cavemen. You can follow me on Instagram at Joey Clift with like 5 or 6 eyes because a 12-year-old took Joey Clift with 1 eye and I just have to deal. And then if you want to check out some of my work, you can watch Spirit Rangers on Netflix. Season 2 just dropped a few weeks ago. So proud of it and happy with how it turned out, so definitely check it out. And then my Comedy Central digital series, Gone Native. We just launched a really great website where you can watch all the shorts. Gone Native is... it's basically it's a series of animated comedy PSAs about like weird microaggressions that Native folks often run into, and you can check all those out and also get some cool resources to learn more about different Native issues at gonenative.tv. So that's pretty much I don't know, that's my deal. Also, buy a Far Side book. Actually, no. Don't buy a Far Side book. Gary Larson has enough money. Steal him from the internet.
Right. Teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
To do a little admin on our side, of course, if you like the show, like, rate, subscribe, drop us reviews on iTunes or Podcast Addict or wherever you found it. If you have feedback, send it to @NostalgiumPod on Twitter or find us on Instagram. Just type in Nostalgium Arcanum. You'll find it. And please follow us on Instagram because that's where I put bonus stuff for all these episodes. A little extra content for you there. If you have thoughts on the Far Side or other recent episodes, which include, we just did that one on everybody's favorite Disney songs. We did one on Jurassic Park before that. And before that, I think Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Coming up, we've got next for 4th of July is Rocky IV, followed by, I believe, Terminator 2. Other things in the mix are Back to the Future, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So lots of good stuff coming down the line. And Joey, one for you. We're going to do Chrono Trigger pretty
Hell
soon.
Yeah.
So that I'm really looking forward to that one. That will do it for this one. Joey, thanks again for dropping by. This is great.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. And go to the Far Side. I don't know. There's not a catchphrase to end on.
There's none. So, until next time, that's one more entry in the Nostalgium Arcanum.
What's the matter, Wood?
I don't get the Far Side.
Woody, hand it over here. Come on, let's have a look. Okay, Wood. Now, you see here in the first panel, cows are standing on their hind legs, right? The second panel, when the car goes by, they're acting like normal cows.
See, the idea here is, Wood, that, cows only act like cows when we're around. Other times they act like people. Does that help you clear it up a little bit for you? Just meant I don't get the Far Side in my newspaper at home, but thanks for treating me like a 1-year-old.